So I'm going to just talk to you about a modified sort of getting to yes framework. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I don't have a lot of time, but one of the things that I am going to do is I'm going to add to getting to yes, because the first piece of this is not in getting to yes. It's actually in the next book in the series called Getting Past No. And for those of you who don't know, there's kind of a sequential series of books that William has written. So there was Getting to Yes, there was Getting Past No. Then he wrote a book called The Third Side, which, I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Carrie.
Carrie, I apologize. That I was talking to Carrie about. The Third Side is actually a systematic approach for dealing with conflict. And it might be something that you all want to look at, because it's not just about negotiation, it's about how do we engage the community in what we're doing. And the third side, so we often think of conflicts as two-sided, right? Democrats, Republicans, blah, 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 whatever. The third side is the surrounding community. It's everybody. And what's great about the framework is it begins to say, what's the best solution for all of us in this community? And more importantly, there are 10 roles of the third side. And so there's a role for everybody, because not everybody's a mediator, not everybody's comfortable being a mediator. There's a role of a witness, there's a role of a healer, there's a role of a referee. And so you can look at that and think about how it might apply. I find it actually applies quite well in smaller communities. It actually comes from collectivist societies who have been resolving conflicts for centuries using this approach. And there's also an entity called the Not in Our Town movement. Anybody heard of that? Right? Well, they essentially are third-siders. And Not in Our Town movement, really, I mean, they often come into play when, for example, there's a hate crime that's happened in a community and the community rallies to push back against something like that. And then there's another book that William just wrote called, one called The Power of Positive No. So before you say yes, you need to often say no, and you should learn how to say no constructively without destroying the relationship. And then the last one was getting to yes with yourself, because as I said before, a lot of the problems that we have rest inside of us and not outside. That said, there's a concept called going to the balcony. And the balcony is a place to try to manage the emotional side of negotiation. Now, the world of negotiation for many years because the world of negotiation started long ago, but the study of negotiation really started back in the 1950s in the world of economics. And the advice was to keep emotions out of negotiation. Look, the problem is that we're human, right? And we're comprised of two things, logic and emotion, right? Some of us. Some of us lean more in one direction and some lean more in the other, right? But how absurd would it be for me to say to you, well, let's just leave logic out of this? That'd be ridiculous, right?
It's my daughter.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have 3 girls, 15, so I have a 15-year-old, and logic does sort of float out. I'll tell you a quick story. So like 3 weeks ago, we didn't have bologna, and she lost her mind. And I looked at her and I said, this is all about bologna. And she goes, wait a minute, I'm being ridiculous, aren't I? And I said, maybe. So I do have a teenager that maybe can move back to, and in fact, I taught her this idea. And when she gets mad at me, she says, I need to go to the balcony, Dad. So it does work, okay, with a teenager, which is really the ultimate proof of what works and what doesn't.
My daughter would be like, what balcony? There is no balcony. You have a one-story house.
So look, we are logical and emotional creatures. It is the way we are. The problem is that emotion often takes us over, right? That's what we equate. When we hear emotion, we hear emotional. And so we succumb to our emotions. So we can't keep them out. We have to find a way of managing them. A good friend of mine wrote a book called Beyond Reason. And he effectively talked about the fact that if you don't find a way to bring them in and try to suppress your emotions, they will find their own way in, and it won't be pretty. Right? And so the reality is that you have to have some way of thinking about this. But one of the things you need to do is you need to think about why. Why is this so difficult? With a teenager, it's a little more obvious as to why it's difficult. But asking yourself when you're dealing with, say, a difficult person or somebody that you've dealt with over the years, what is it that Bill does all the time Because people go into negotiations and they know that Bill is going to push their buttons and they do nothing about it. And Bill keeps pushing their buttons and they get mad at Bill. It's like, you know what, look in the mirror, deal with it, like you can. I say to my kids, and I'll say it to you, other people don't make you angry, sorry. You let yourself become angry, and I know every parent just cringed when I said that, but it's the truth. The only thing you have is, you don't have control over the other person's response. You have control over yours. And so knowing what those things are that really set you off is a key to dealing with negotiation effectively. And so, think about what is your natural reaction. Are you most likely to, and these map to the conflict or the negotiation styles we just talked about, right? Are you likely to respond in kind? Are you going to break off? Are you going to give in? And honestly, I know this is corny, but when you name your emotions in your head, I'm not saying out loud, but in your head saying, okay, I'm clearly frustrated. Why is this? Why? I mean, we all have conversations with ourselves. Some do it outside their body, the rest of us do it inside our body. But the point is that when you think about these things, you can begin to detach a little bit, right? And the key is to have your emotions not so that they don't have you, because that's the difference, right? So, and you need to distinguish your emotions from your triggers. So just for 2 minutes at your tables, I want you to do something, okay? Two quick challenges here. What triggers, so words, situations, or conditions, cause you to react with strong emotions or lose your cool, and why, okay? And then physically, what happens to you? What does your body do when you're triggered? Okay, so just take 2 minutes, talk about 1 minute on each, okay? Go. There's actually a physiological reason why the balcony matters. So does anybody know what happens to the blood in your body when, so this goes back to our hunter-gatherer days, and right, fight or flight, okay? So we haven't really evolved beyond that on some level. We still instinctually, when we're triggered, physiologically, that's the reaction we have. But interestingly, the blood in our body goes to, when we're triggered, goes to our core first, and then it's redistributed to our hands and feet. So we either can fight or flee. So what's the problem with that?
Nothing left for your brain.
There's nothing left for your brain, right? And blood carries oxygen, so that means you're not really thinking very clearly at all. So when somebody actually says to you, I don't know why I said that, they're not lying to you. They really don't. They weren't thinking clearly because there was no oxygen running to their brain. And so we have to have, so this is what happens, right? So we get triggered. Emotionally, we have this reaction. We're getting ready to fight or flee, and we say something stupid, and we give away more than we should. There's a great quote by a guy named Ambrose Bierce, who is an American humorist, who said, when angry, we'll make the best speech we'll ever regret. Right? And the balcony is designed to prevent you from doing that. So we talk about having a balcony technique, something that you do that redistributes perhaps the oxygen or gives you an opportunity to get out of the moment. Honestly, I will tell you that I've taught this framework and lots of others to people, and this is the one that people email me about and say, thank God for the balcony. Because it's simple, it's easy, and it's really important, because this is when you make your mistakes. If you've ever been in a negotiation and you've given up too much, whatever that means, and you've walked out of the room and kicked yourself, you should have gone to the balcony, right? So this is a really important tool. It's simple, and yet it's really fundamental to negotiating and dealing with difficult problems, as well as knowing when you need to take a trip to the balcony. And they can be lots of different things. I often just say, you know what? I'd really like to give you a thoughtful response, so I need, to reschedule. Give me an hour, let me go get a coffee, bathroom break, do something, right? I have a friend who said to me, oh, I have a balcony technique. He's like, when I'm arguing with my wife, I take a sip of water. And I say, well, how does that help you? And he said, because when I have water in my mouth, I can't say anything. So whatever it is, I don't care what your technique is, but the point is, know when you're triggered and have some way of getting out of the situation so you don't make things worse. Because when you make something worse, then you have to dig out just to get you back where you started, right? So that's the first step, and this is the one piece of dealing with conflict and negotiation that you're going to come back to at a number of different places in a process. So find a technique, and again, for some people it might be taking some deep breaths, right? And deep breaths have a physiological purpose, right? They redistribute oxygen in your body. So have something, count to 10, count to 100, I don't care, but something where you don't go down this road.